Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey there, Phil.
Hi, Christian. And Skye Jutani.
Hello.
Hi. We are Zooming from various locations. Jason Rugg is at the helm. Hi, Jason.
Hey there.
Hi. From safe, we're from at least 2 miles between each one of us. So I think that's Dr. Fauci would be happy with us for that. Here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. So, Skye, how's your quarantine?
It's okay. The weather is getting a little bit nicer. We have, I think, 10 cubic yards of mulch arriving on Thursday.
Oh, wow. Are you going to wipe it all down before you spread it?
No.
Okay.
But I am going to employ my children and multiple wheelbarrows to spread it.
Because you got kind of a park out your back door.
Mm-hmm.
Are kids playing in that park? Is it allowed?
Well, and there's tons of kids playing in my cul-de-sac, and they are definitely not social distancing. These are our kids are the oldest on our little cul-de-sac. Everyone else has younger kids.
Yeah.
And yesterday they were playing hide and seek, boys against girls on the cul-de-sac, and about 4 girls were crammed into a car together.
Okay.
Hiding. And so we're like, okay, so much for social distancing.
So we're kind of throwing in the towel on preventing the virus from taking over the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I don't know how parents with younger kids are doing it. I mean, how do you get young children in this kind of weather to social distance? And you can't just keep them locked in the house. So there's no judgment here, but
everyone has to play alone in their own little yard. Play alone. Go out, hide and seek alone. In your yard.
They need to put each child in their own little hamster ball.
Yeah.
And then they can just roll around the neighborhood.
Yes.
That would work.
And then fill all the hamster balls with Lysol.
Yeah.
To keep them disinfected. Christian, how's your quarantine?
It's pretty good. Today, my son comes home from college, so we're trying to figure out how to bring him home and yet keep him at a distance. So that's happening, and I do think
only work for so long.
I know. I think it's an effort and futility, but we'll see how that goes. And today I did a class with Furman College has a French class, and they wanted to do they saw the film and wanted to do a Q&A with me and Flavie and Thomas. And so that was fun to do from my house.
Cool.
So that was my first class I've attended during quarantine. Have you guys been to a class yet?
No. My son is attending all his classes. My 3-year-old granddaughter this morning had a little Sunday school class from our church. They're doing it every day of the week, a little thing for her age group kids. So I walked by, and our children's pastor was holding up a sheep puppet and singing a song through Zoom. Strange times we live in.
It is strange, but I am thankful for the technology, and it does make us relate differently and think outside of the box creatively.
Yep.
And I do think I still maintain there are positive things that can be gleaned from this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, when the Spanish flu came through, did people even have telephones? A few people, maybe?
Maybe a few.
Yeah.
Party lines.
What could you do? You couldn't take your classes online, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken. You couldn't do that. You just sat home and waited for the stock market to crash in 10 years.
But in 1918, that's what people didn't do anything anyway.
Well, they
in cities
they read books. They read books. They dug for coal, and then they died at 42.
In cities, they did, Skye. You're thinking of just your own family's background. The Swedes and the Indians, the coal miners.
Right. There's lots of Indian coal miners.
Okay. You know what we haven't done in a couple of weeks, because the virus is such a serious topic. It just seemed like it would never be possible to do this in the midst of a pandemic.
What?
News of the butt.
Oh, no.
And now it's time for News of the
Can the virus be spread through farts?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
This is real news. This is real news.
Are you sure this is not The Onion? This has got to be The Onion.
As health officials warn of the coronavirus spreading through droplets generated by sneezes and coughs, some people have wondered whether passed gas could also be a culprit of transmission. Recent articles, some shared widely on social media, have explored the possibility. One article, coronavirus could be spreading across the globe through farts, claim doctors. That's another title I never thought I'd hear. Had 4,700 shares on Facebook. So I read the article. Just so you don't have to. I read the article about that form of transmission of the virus. And there's good news, there's bad news, and there's good news. There's bad news.
I'll take the bad news first.
Okay, the bad news is you probably could catch the virus from a fart. Okay, that's the bad news. The good news is not if the farter is wearing pants.
This is why we wear masks on our faces.
So pants are butt masks.
There is another option.
That's what we've learned. Wear masks on your buttocks?
No, you can fart into your elbow.
Or someone else's elbow.
And you, Skye, could you demonstrate, since we're recording video now, how exactly one might do that? Because that sounds like a yoga position.
Well, I am Indian.
Downward dog, elbow fart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, bad news and good news. Bad news, yes, it's possible. Good news, we need to wear pants. So maybe Zoom meetings are not helpful because so many of us are throwing pants to the wind. And also,
we're also throwing wind through our pants.
Throwing wind through our pants. Touche. Well done. Nicely played.
Thank you.
If you don't have a mask and you're out in public, you can also, and we now know, put pants on your head, and it'll do the same thing.
Or you could put a mask on your butt.
That reminds me of that guy who did Pants on the Ground. Remember that guy? Pants on the ground, pants on the ground. You guys don't remember this guy?
No.
American Idol.
Yes,
Yeah.
American Idol.
And I think
Now he's going to be trending. Yeah, he's going to be trending on YouTube.
I missed Mr. Pants on the Ground. Do I have to Google it?
Yes, Google it. It's hilarious.
It's funny.
It'll never get out of your head.
It's a self-written song about people wearing pants too low. And he's like, I don't know, 60, 70, something. He's old.
Interesting. Okay.
This has been the news of the butt.
Conservative group calls for Reopen Church Sunday. The conservative law firm launched a Reopen Church Sunday initiative this week, calling on churches to begin gathering in person again, despite reports of the deadly novel coronavirus being spread during worship services. The campaign is organized by Liberty Counsel, which created a website for the initiative. Several people got sick while working together on the website. I'm kidding. Encouraging Christian leaders.
No relation to Liberty University, correct?
No. The Liberty Counsel. We conservative Christians really like the word liberty. Have you noticed that?
But not its other derivatives like liberal or libertarian.
Oh no.
That's interesting. No. You're such a quick thinker, Skye. You really are.
No. Encouraging Christian leaders to begin. This is what we want. Do you know what we want Christian leaders to do?
Please
begin holding in-person worship services starting the weekend of May 3rd. That's what we want.
I got some bad news for you.
Everywhere. What's the bad news?
I read an article last week, scientific article, really cumbersome mess, like a journal with all the data and all that sort of stuff.
But you had nothing else to do.
I didn't have anything else to do.
The pandemic.
You actually shared it and I read it and I thought, I got to stop reading stuff Skye shares because it melts my brain.
Oh, yeah. I send out fart articles. You could read my articles.
I could
They're
definitely.
Fun.
The gist of it was some researcher looked at close to 100 cases of super spreaders, which is not anything having to do with...
That's what I push around my backyard when I want to seed my lawn. Right?
See, I was going to go somewhere else, back to your fart thing. But anyway, the they looked at these super spreaders, these people who weren't necessarily sick themselves, but were shedding off tons of the virus and contaminating and infecting a lot of other people in different countries and different settings. And what did these super spreader events have in common? And I think it was like 60 or 70% were focused on religious gatherings. Mm-hmm. And they said the problem, and it was different creeds. It was Jews, it was Muslims, it was Hindus, it was Christians, it was Catholics, it was all different creeds. But they said what these gatherings had in common is it wasn't just a religious ceremony where people sat passively, but they were religious gatherings where people were expressive.
They passed the peace.
They pass the peace, or they're standing up and singing. And so as you're breathing and projecting, it all goes everywhere. And the takeaway was that even as the virus threat kind of diminishes and things start slowly opening up, there is a unique form of danger at religious gatherings that is different from, say, a movie theater. Mm-hmm. So even though a movie theater may have 500 people in it and everyone's quietly watching the screen, a virus is less likely to spread as much as having 500 people in a room that are all singing together.
Standing and singing and then passing the peace.
Right. So the problem,
greeting the stranger in their midst.
The problem that's going to happen is if the government actually makes policy based on evidence, they may limit religious gatherings a lot longer than others, which is going to fuel the conspiracy. Exactly. It's going to fuel the conspiracy that the government's using the pandemic to squash religious liberty.
So Matt Staver, the founder of Liberty Counsel, told Religion News Service, when pressed about the concern that gathering for worship could result in infection and death, he argued that responsibility should lie with individual worshipers, not with the government. It's not the government's job to keep us safe. It's all of our own individual jobs to keep us safe. There's a risk walking out the door no matter what. People take precautions. If someone is not comfortable going to an in-person service, then by all means choose a different alternative. And then he went on and said, just because you had one choir somewhere in the United States that sang together closely and some people got COVID-19 is no reason to punish the rest of the 500,000 churches.
This person has no idea how science works or viruses spread.
You're punishing us because the virus spread in one place. And so you think it's going to spread everywhere.
Well, then the virus goes wherever those people go. Moron.
No, it doesn't.
And the other side of it is, let's say the virus doesn't go anywhere else, but only the people at that gathering get sick. A certain percentage of them are going to end up in the hospital using up critical resources so that when I have a heart attack, they're not available for me. We are interconnected here. It's not an isolated thing.
No, I'm an island. Me and Jesus and my Bible. We're on our island alone and we want to go to church. Don't tell me I can't go to church.
This is American hyper-individualism and selfishness on steroids, intersecting with religious liberty.
So, what should a thinking Christian who does want to walk the middle line, what response should we have, and what should our thinking be around what the government is trying to do?
I think it's pretty simple. I don't even think you have to be that thinking of a Christian. You just have to be a Christian.
Yes, except we have lots of Christians in the United States, and they have varying,
Christian. You pretend you're the average Christian in America.
Okay. Well, there's not an average Christian in America anymore.
Okay. Well, just pretend. I'm going to assume you have some degree of Bible knowledge. What are the greatest commandments?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
Love God, love your neighbor as yourself.
What in a pandemic does it mean to love my neighbor?
On Sunday morning in a large building and sing and hug. That was right after.
Well, I'll tell you what I read today that was so incredibly convicting. I read someone was writing this article on A.W. Tozer. And this someone pointed out how he was such a flawed hero of the faith, where he just had this intimate relationship with God, and he contributed to our Christian evangelical, teachings, and yet he had a horrible home life, and it was in shambles. And I was so convicted because I thought, you can hold to your Christian ideals. You can seek God passionately. You can write books and sermons and all of that. And yet, those that are closest to you do not feel your love at all. And so it sounds like to me what you're saying is, instead of like holding to our religious liberties and, saying we have to be able to have the right to do what we want to do, we should be thinking about the greater good of those that are around us.
Yeah, maybe the guy from the Liberty, whatever it is, Phil.
Liberty.
Is
strong company.
Maybe, his point is we don't want the government telling us this. We want to be able to choose on our own.
Right. But we want to decide if we want to keep people from dying.
But the problem with his logic is he then says we should be able to gather because it's our right, but he doesn't say anything about how that individual choice puts at risk our neighbors.
Yeah.
That's what the blind spot he has. So
but if your neighbors don't want to be at risk, they shouldn't come.
But then they can't go anywhere. That's the point.
Yeah.
You can't say the virus is just going to stay within the walls of these church. Therefore, if you don't want it, don't come in here. That's not how a virus works.
So what's the solution?
You're effectively voting to create a new distribution center for the virus when you say our church is meeting.
Right.
So what's the solution then, Skye?
The solution is a vision of our interdependence where we realize my choices right now and my family's choices, my church's choices are going to have an effect on my neighbors. And therefore, I will willingly choose to sacrifice some of my freedoms and liberties in order to do what's best and most loving for my neighbor. That is the essence of the commandment that Jesus gives us. And what the American ethos comes in and says is, screw my neighbor, I have a right to do this, and I should be able to. And that's where Christian teaching and American values are in conflict. And here's a case where a Christian is opting for the American values rather than Christian teachings.
Oh, boy. Did you read Jonathan Merritt's column he wrote for The Atlantic last week?
I saw he posted it, but I haven't read it yet.
Some of the most visible Christians in America are failing the coronavirus test. In place of love, they're offering stark, self-righteous judgment. And he's speaking about the leaders that are basically answering the question, so who is God mad at by doing this to us? And, who is he judging? John Piper said, yes, in fact, God sometimes uses disease to bring particular judgments upon those who reject him and give themselves over to sin. So perhaps the coronavirus is judgment for those who are committing sin, which would, I guess, be all of us, everyone, forever.
All over the world.
R.R. Reno, the editor of the Christian journal First Things, argued that it's not worth a mass shutdown of society just to fight the virus. He said there is a demonic side to the sentimentalism of saving lives at any cost. He decried the ill-conceived crusade against human finitude and the dolorous reality of death.
What?
This is odd as a Christian leader saying, hey, some people are going to die. Get over it. Keep the economy going.
Yeah. All people will know you are my disciples by your economic
commitment to the economy above all. One recent poll reports that some 44% of Americans say the pandemic is a wake-up call from God and signs of coming judgment.
Love it. There's no greater love than this, than a man lay down his life for the economy. Is that what we're talking about?
I think I read that somewhere. Didn't you read that somewhere?
No, I have a question. Okay, I know we're talking about this tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
Why does what seems so clear to us, why then is it so different with other Christian leaders? If they are holding to the same values we hold to, the same Bible we hold to, and what seems so clear and boiled down to basic principles of love your neighbor, why then aren't they seeing it that way?
Well, be specific. Which one of these? Because there are the responses that say, okay, this is God's judgment. What is he trying to tell us? There are the responses that say, don't tell me I can't meet with my church because that's freedom of religion. So we're going to meet anyway. And there are the responses that say, hey, the economy is more important than being alive for a few people. So which
but in all of those can be answered by what Skye says. Either we love our neighbors more than we love everything else, or we love everything else more than we do caring for our neighbors and our community. And so if for these biblical leaders, no matter what their point of view is, shouldn't they hold the same truth, which is love your God and love your neighbor as yourself?
I'm going to speculate on two things. And obviously I don't know any of these people and can't speak for them, but let me give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that a lot of them are in communities that are not deeply impacted by the virus. We know that it's obviously worse in New York than it is in rural Nebraska, right? So if you're in a part of the country that is not seeing the impact of this virus, thousands of people aren't dying in your hospitals, it's pretty hard to see this as a catastrophic moment, right? That's number one. But number two, when you marry that with a longstanding, profound distrust of the government in all of its forms, and you're seeing the economic toil or impact of all of this, you put that together and you have a recipe for exactly the responses you're hearing, right? This is the government's overreacting. The economy is hurting more people by shutting it down. Our community is not being affected by this virus. We should be allowed to worship together. We should reopen the economy because it's hurting more people than it's helping right now. I get that perspective, but it's too narrow. They don't see the bigger picture. This is the same mindset that said, well, there's a pandemic going on in China and Korea. That doesn't affect us. We'll be fine. Well, that's a pretty naive view in a globalized world with intercontinental travel. But some people just don't have that bigger vision. And I think that's part of what's going on here.
Do you think as conservative Christians, we were impacted by the AIDS epidemic? The last real serious epidemic of our times that affected America, not just, oh, look what's going on in Asia, or look what's, Ebola, look what's going on in Africa, was the AIDS epidemic. But it targeted a community that was very easy to say, oh, you're bringing this upon yourself. Mm-hmm. You are sinning against God. And especially when it happened right in the midst of the rise of the religious right and the moral majority, so conservative Christians were becoming politically active again, and we were launching talk radio, and we were launching our own world of commentary on society and what was wrong with it. And Phyllis Schlafly was raging against the NRA, and C. Everett Koop was raging against abortion, and Dobson and Falwell were raging against everything. And then the AIDS epidemic happens, and guess what? It only seems to affect gay men who are obviously living in rebellion against God. So it was so easy to say that was judgment.
Right.
It was so easy to say, wow, look at, you are getting, you are reaping what you sowed. And I'm just wondering if that kind of shifted our thinking about this sort of thing, so that every major big incident after that, we were saying, okay, whose fault is this? Is this the abortionists? Is this the gays? Is this, whose sin brought this about? So that we don't have to.
That's been an age-old question since the Bible. Who sinned? This man or his parents?
Yeah, but I don't know that earthquakes, 200 years ago created quite as much of a whose fault was this? Let's pick a group that we consider other, and it's their fault, but I'm just wondering, and tell me if you think I'm wrong. Do we think specifically in American conservative circles, did the AIDS epidemic make us more likely to look for how big events like this are somebody else's fault and somebody else's problem?
That's an interesting hypothesis.
Thank you.
I don't know. I agree with Christian. This is an age-old impulse.
Yeah.
But how it's played out in American history would be interesting to look at. The AIDS thing is also, I don't think it provoked quite as much fear, particularly among conservative Christians, because
it wasn't going to affect us.
Right. If you
never
don't
going to get to us.
If you're not a drug user and you're not engaged in promiscuous sexual activity, you're probably not going to get AIDS.
Right.
Well, let me just say, being in the artistic community and living in New York at the time, it may not have in the Christian community, but in the actor and arts and entertainment community, it was petrifying.
But they're evil anyway. I mean, we've all known that entertainment is evil. So, my grandparents would never go to a movie theater because that's a den of iniquity.
But Phil, I think the other question related to that would be, do Christians genuinely today believe that they will not get the coronavirus because they're Christians and God's on their side? It's kind of like, well, I'm not going to get AIDS because I'm not going to behave in a way that contradicts Scripture where I would get it. Do people have that mindset about this virus, which is a respiratory virus? You don't get it through sexual intimacy. You get it by being coughed on or breathing someone else's air. It's a little bit more passive.
Yeah. But we're still, so many are ready to say, okay, what is God doing here? Oh, he's trying to, there was a 10-point list published of 10 reasons God might be judging America.
Seriously?
Yeah, with the coronavirus. And it was everything from not being kind to the poor to abortion, to, it was like all these reasons for a global pandemic, but specifically about America. We're so ready to look for culpability and try to say, and that leads me to what I wanted to talk about next, which is all of this is an assumption, and this is going back to the AIDS epidemic, that God is doing this for a reason, that everything that happens here is because God is pulling the strings, pushing the buttons, making floods, making disasters, making epidemics. And Tim Gombis, who is a theologian, he teaches New Testament at Grand Rapids Theological Seminary, made a little bit of a stir last week when he put out a blog post with the title, God is Not in Control. And that made a lot of people say, wait, what?
That's clickbait right there.
That is good stuff.
I hope he's tenured.
I hope he's tenured too, yes. In anxious times, we look to hold on to something certain. We seek guarantees, and we want to believe that someone is in control. Christians find themselves saying things like, God is sovereign and in control of this situation. And we, how many times have I've done that a million times, but ultimately, God's in control, so we can trust him on this.
I say that every time I watch the news now. Or at least a White House news briefing.
And then Tim Gombis says, but this is not a faithful representation of how Scripture portrays God's sovereign kingship. Now follow me here. This is interesting. According to Christian Scripture, there is a distinction between, number one, God's identity as king over creation, and number two, the manifestation of God's sovereign kingship within creation. So God created the world as his temple, and he created human beings as his image bearers within creation. His rule over the world was to be manifested by humans, overseeing the spread of shalom, of peace and blessing. God charged humanity to rule over creation, subduing it, bringing about its flourishing, and enjoying its rich abundance. Okay, you with me so far? Are you with me? Okay.
I dozed off there for a second. Sorry, I'm here though.
Everyone would clearly see God as sovereign king over creation and the reality that he truly was inhabiting his temple when God's image bearers were doing what he told them to do. But humans chose not to do that. Humanity rebelled, and sin and death entered creation, and we have seen chaos and destruction ever since. So, while God remains sovereign king, God's sovereign kingship is not being manifested in the creation that is his temple because his image bearers are not manifesting it. So, chaos currently exists on earth because we are the ones who are supposed to be subduing the chaos as the image bearers of God, and we're not doing it. So until God returns and sets everything right, this is the argument that Tim Gombis is making. God is not that he cannot control it, but he is not controlling it because that was supposed to be our job. Okay, discuss amongst yourselves. Let's start with Christian. Christian, God is not controlling this because we're the ones who are supposed to be reigning.
All right. Well, let me see if I can tell you what I think based on what I read in the Bible, and you can tell me if that's the same thing he's saying or different, because I'm slightly confused.
Okay.
All right. So the way that I think about this is I do hear everybody saying, oh, God caused this to happen. He wants to teach us something. It's because of our sin and all of these things. But there is no way to know if he caused this, if he allowed this, if it's a plague that Satan has decided to throw on the world to help people not believe in God. I don't know. But all I know is ultimately, as a Christian, I believe sin entered the world, and so stuff is broken. People are sinful. We all hurt each other and do bad things to one another and the environment, and none of that will be put right as it should be, the way it was originally intended, until Christ does return. Is that what he said? Kind of, although I don't think he would say that maybe God is doing this. I think he would say definitively God isn't doing this. But we can't know definitively the mind of God.
No, we can't, but it puts you in a position of saying, okay, so God is killing lots and lots of children to get our attention because of Roe v. Wade?
Well, did he say that did he say that God is punishing us because of our crimes of abortion?
Who?
This
Tim?
Author. Tim.
No. He says,
he's saying the opposite.
He's saying the opposite, that we live in a world that is chaotic, and this is the chaos. This is the chaos that God charged us with, together with him, ruling over and subduing.
But the inverse of this, Christian, is if you're not going to blame God or hold God responsible for what's going on, and it's we who are responsible for everything that's going on in this world, then you could infer from that we ought not look to God to get us out of this mess either. We need to figure it out. Does that make sense?
That's an interesting splitting hairs.
Here's a big difference. Because as I read this, it's quite provocative, I must say, but it also lines up with most of the theology I've been reading in the last 10 years. This would take you from a posture of, God, what are you doing, to a posture of, God, what should we do about this? As opposed to everything that happens, okay, God, why did you give me cancer? What am I supposed to learn from my cancer? And when are you going to take it away or not? And, okay, God, I have cancer. What should I do? What's the attitude you want me to take in this event? How can I use this to reveal you to others? So we are charged with manifesting God's reign on earth. We are charged with that. We rebel.
So in a sense, does that make us little demigods, little mini gods?
The Bible calls us co-regents,
co-rulers. Yeah.
So co-kings. Yeah, we're supposed to co-reign with God.
But can't we say, isn't there a middle ground where we can say God is ultimately the ruler of all things? Yes, sin entered the world, and so there is chaos. And we are to seek him on a daily basis, regardless of what our circumstances and situations are, to be in relationship with him, to learn how to be in relationship with others. And the answer of why he did this, or who's supposed to fix it, or when it's supposed to be fixed, is really a false question.
I agree with Christian.
Okay.
I think Tim Gombis is making... I totally do. I think Tim Gombis is making a good point on an area of theology that a lot of American white evangelicals have a blind spot, for sure. But I think he's overstating his case. So it is indeed true that we are called to be co-regents with God, that we are given responsibility over the earth, that we are to rule. And we ought to, in every circumstance, ask, how, God, am I supposed to manifest your kingdom on earth in this circumstance I find myself in? Absolutely. It's not a passivity, what are you doing, God? It's what are you calling us to? Totally agree. But that does not exclude the possibility and the request that God intervene, even in miraculous ways, to manifest his presence in the world in ways that are beyond us. And that is the whole story of the Bible, right? He calls Abraham and says, hey, through you and through your family, I'm going to bless the earth and redeem creation. And yet Abraham and his family screw up over and over and over and over again. And so finally he basically says, I'll do it myself. And so Jesus shows up and he does it. Or through David, your line you will have a descendant on the throne of Israel forever. David's descendants screw it up. And he says, okay, I'll do it myself. And you see that in the New Testament as well. I mean, there are moments when God does not answer the church's prayers and James gets his head cut off. And there's other times when he does answer their prayers and an angel frees Peter from the prison. So it isn't an either or. We cooperate with God in our activity in the world, and he is still active in it. So we can't make it all God's sovereignty or all human agency.
So there is divine intervention.
Absolutely. You can't have the resurrection without divine intervention.
Do you think we claim divine intervention more than is actually accurate or less? Does God intervene more than we evangelicals think he does or less than we think he does?
Both.
And I think he intervenes in different ways than we perceive. So, for example, we may think his intervening in one way is for our good and it's God intervening, but that's ain't necessarily so.
Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Every molecule in creation is currently being sustained by God's presence. He is constantly present and intervening in all of creation. And yet there are some times where that manifestation of his presence is more vivid to us than at other times, say Jesus healing a blind person.
Yes.
Both happen. And so the problem is in a lot of religious communities, we diminish that sustaining presence of God. We just don't see him in the ordinary. And we overemphasize the few times he may appear to us in the extraordinary. And a healthy, mature faith sees less of one and more of the other. We see more of God in the ordinary, and we expect less of him in the extraordinary.
Okay.
So let me ask you guys something then.
Yes.
What would be, as we're all processing, and I speak for all of us regular people out here in the world, as we're all processing all of this that is happening, and as we're living in this world with people that are saying this is God's judgment on man because of abortion or homosexuality or whatever, how should we engage in conversation with others around us in a thoughtful way that moves the conversation forward, doesn't disintegrate into arguments? Or
Christian, didn't you and I talk about this in a Christian Asks recently?
Yes, but that wasn't here.
No, but I don't know where it's going to be yet. It should be for our Patreon folks, I suppose.
Yeah. So what did you answer?
Well, now you're just giving it away for free, aren't you?
Hey, you got to keep it behind the paywall. Keep the good stuff behind the paywall. Don't you know?
He's going to be mad at you now if you don't answer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the short answer is I think we got to get a lot more comfortable with saying I don't know. And
you say that a lot. There's a paradox. We have to get comfortable in this paradox.
I don't know if that's true.
There you go. Well done, Phil.
Thank you.
But there's other people who are just going to chafe constantly against any ambiguities and mysteries, and they are where they are. I think I jokingly said to you that simple minds look for simple answers. And
so if someone takes that position, you'd tell them they have a simple mind?
No, you should know they have a simple mind, and maybe the ambiguities I'd like to present to them aren't going to be helpful.
One thing I heard Tim Gamba say, which I think is helpful to a lot of people, when you ask, yeah, but in the Old Testament, Israel did this, and then bad things happened, and they were good, and then good things happened. So you see, God rewards and he punishes. And the very simple response of Israel was in a covenant with God that said, if you follow me, you will be blessed. If you sin against me, you will be cursed, and these bad things will happen. We are not in that covenant.
But a lot of Americans think we are.
That was the covenant between God and Israel. We're not in. We have a new covenant. Have you ever heard of the new covenant?
But I think people do think that we're in that covenant because I think it is difficult to know. You hear that we've been grafted into these people. And so, Skye, you said to me on the Christian Ask that we did, are you Israel? And is this, Palestine 2,000 years ago? And of course the answer is no. But in the New Testament, we are told that we're grafted into this branch. So I think in our minds, we put ourselves.
Yeah, but who's grafted in? It's not the United States.
Right. It's individual Christians.
It's the believers. True. And the other place that this is rooted is on a little boat coming over from England called the Arbella in 1622. The Puritans came over. They were led by John Winthrop. And before they landed in Massachusetts, he gave them a sermon. And in the sermon, he equated their little Massachusetts Bay colony as the new Israel. And he said, we will be a city upon a hill, which Ronald Reagan used to quote that sermon all the time. And he applied.
He made it shiny.
That's right. And he applied the curses and blessings of Israel in the Torah to their Massachusetts Bay colony. And ever since then, Americans have carried with them this mythic vision that we are the new Israel and that God will bless us if we bless him. And if
But in reality, it's just Massachusetts.
Right.
Not all of it.
Clearly.
Austin.
So, but that mythology has been with us for 400 years.
That's why the Patriots win so much.
Skye, that's really mind-blowing when you think that was one little sermon that started 400 years ago that traveled quickly to 1980 and to 88, and now it's permeated our identity so much that it's impossible to extricate it. I mean
it's also one of the reasons why so many conservative Christians in America are such strong advocates of the nation state of Israel. It isn't because they know anything about what's going on in Israel or through the Palestinians. It's not because they have any deep loyalties to the state of Israel. It's because they've been told those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed, taken out of context from Genesis. And the assumption is, America, we need to be on Israel's side so God will bless the United States. It's all this Old Testament covenant language that they think applies to the United States. And it's done incalculable damage, not just to our politics, but to our Christian witness in the U.S., because we justify all kinds of terrible behavior to our neighbors because we feel like, well, if we don't condemn LGBT people and these people and those people, that God's not going to bless our country. And that's just warped beyond belief. And it's all rooted in really bad theology.
Well, and it also sounds like it's bargaining with God. I mean, it sounds like, that kind of mentality is we're going to have this formula. And if we follow this formula, then A, we're going to be blessed by God. And B, we are the chosen people and it's all going to go well for us and we're going to get good things. It's really messed up.
It's really messed up. All right. I'm going to wrap it up. That seems like a good point to wrap it up now that.
Sounds kind of depressing. I think we should try another ending.
Ended on a down note.
Can you sing us one of your ukulele songs and make up?
I was just thinking about doing that. Hang on, let me grab my ukulele.
He's got to work the COVID-19 farts into it somehow.
Did you hear that, Skye? Did you hear that, Phil? You got to work the COVID-19 farts in there.
Oh man! Oh no! Oh. Someone retuned it for me. That's nice. Probably my granddaughter. Hey, do we want the world to admire us, even if we have the coronavirus? Instead of doing our best, we keep doing our worst. So let's remember that Jesus wants us to put our neighbors first. Okay.
I love it.
Thank you.
I love it when you do that.
Yeah, now I have to tune my ukulele. I'm sorry. I apologize. Someone asked what was the name of the new ukulele, because obviously Plinky Pete died a terrible, horrible, painful, graphic death. And this is actually my son's ukulele, but I gave it to him, so I'm kind of reclaiming it. And I think I'm going to name it Plinky Pedro in the name of the future of the church that is more diverse and more brown. And he's brown.
I like that.
Plinky.
It's a cute little ukulele.
Plinky Pedro. I'm holding him up on the Zoom call. Okay, do we have a guest, Skye? Yeah, but you don't know which one.
Yeah, I mean, this conversation may influence our decision of which guest interview we do next.
Can I just say one thing? If you guys are listening, one way to interact with Phil and Skye and I, there's two actually. One is on our website, right?
Holypost.com.
Holypost.com. The other is on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, make sure it's Skye's handle is @SkyeJatani, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Phil's is at Phil Vischer.
I believe so.
And mine's at Christian's Voice. So tweet at us. Let us know you've listened and what you think about the new video version on YouTube.
Yeah. Woo, woo, woo. Watch the video. Go to the website. Go to Patreon and support us. We really appreciate it. We got Julie. Julie is on the call. She's helping us book new guests. We're trying to get new guests lined up, and she's helping. And part of her salary is being paid by you guys through Patreon support. So we really appreciate that.
And if you know Jen Hatmaker, contact us so we can get her on the podcast. And Skye, you have something coming up on Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. For the next month on Thursday nights at 8:00 Central, I'm going to be on Twitter Live, which is a video streaming thing. And people can interact with me with their questions about my devotional or the podcast or anything else that's going on. We're calling it With Skye Weekly instead of With God Daily. So 8:00 Thursday nights Central.
How does it work?
You're really good at naming things.
Yeah, I like that.
Do we tweet you questions or
No.
what?
It's through Periscope, which I think Twitter bought. So it's a lot like live streaming on Instagram or any of these other sites where you'll see me and then everyone's messages will be scrolling through the bottom. And so I can see questions coming in and then I'll just respond and I don't know, take an hour and 15 minutes and just interact with people. But I especially wanted to do it for my daily devotional subscribers so that we can interact about questions they have or thoughts about recent posts and devos and things.
I'm so excited. Your one today about A.W. Tozer was awesome.
Yeah, a little depressing, but
all right.
It was super convicting. It was great.
My family knew him very well, and they always said, my mother says he was a little depressive.
Well, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he died before his wife, Ada, and she remarried afterwards. And she said when she remarried that she's never been happier in her life because Aidan Tozer loved Jesus Christ, but my new husband loves me.
Oh.
So gives you, and his son, he had 7 children. One of his sons called his mother a single parent because his father was just completely non-engaged, not involved at all.
Oh, I just want to know, how do you think about that?
I think we're got to wrap up. Get the Devo if you want to hear what I think about that.
Get the Devo. Okay.
Get the Devo.
Guest coming up. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Hey everyone, this is Skye. Like many of you, I've got some extra time on my hands because of this quarantine, so I've decided to try something new. I've created an audio version of With God Daily. That means rather than just reading my daily devotionals, you can now hear my melodious voice speaking to you every morning. And I'm not just reading the reflections, but also passages of the Old and New Testaments as well as the historic prayers of the week. This is a difficult time for a lot of us, and unfortunately there are plenty of unthoughtful religious leaders out there offering all kinds of messages right now of blame or judgment or just unhelpful sentimentality about this whole pandemic. But With God Daily is different. I've tried to keep it deeply rooted in scripture and history and current events. It doesn't offer easy answers and it doesn't pull any punches. Instead, it's designed to draw you into deeper communion with God and to show you the current world through the lens of faith rather than fear. I always try to keep it smart, and I promise it's never sappy. And as I've said many times, this is the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals. And now it's got audio. So check it out today or download the app for your phone by visiting withgoddaily.com.
Hi everyone, it's Skye again. I know we talked about in that previous segment that we were going to have a guest interview, but because that segment went so long, we decided to do something a little bit different. I recorded a number of Christian Asks segments with Christian, where she asks me questions about all kinds of things, including the Bible and current events, and we often will share those with our Patreon subscribers, those of you who help support this podcast, and we're really grateful for you. But we thought we'd take one of those segments and put it in the regular show. In this one, Christian asks me about the pandemic and the way different Christians are interpreting it, and is it God's judgment? So given the prior conversation, we thought this would be great to share with you this week. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to check out the Patreon page because there'll be some bonus segments there for you as well. And if you're not a Patreon subscriber, well, here's a little taste, and hopefully it entices you to want to sign up and get more great content like this. So here's our latest Christian Asks. Hey, Christian.
Hey, Skye, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for this time with you. I've had some burning questions, especially since this coronavirus pandemic has begun. And one of them is I'm processing through what I'm hearing a lot in culture or media or even from family and friends, particularly Christians, who say, well, I think this is God's judgment on us for all of the evils that we practice, be it abortion or homosexuality or, murder or lust, pornography. And so, they're basically saying this is God's judgment on us, just like God gave his judgment in the Old Testament. And until our society conforms and begins to be a godly nation where we honor God and we live that way, this is going to continue. I hear that argument a lot. Mm-hmm. And I also hear these are the end times. Jesus is going to be coming back. And neither one of those ring true to me with the understanding that I have of who God is. I'm wondering what you think about that.
My immediate response is simple minds look for simple explanations. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, simple minds look for simple explanations. A child doesn't understand what lightning and thunder are. So the child says, oh, God must be angry because he's raging up in the clouds, right? Simple mind, simple explanation, because the actual explanation is too complicated for a 5-year-old to understand. And I think the same goes for adults. We want a simple explanation. And number one, there isn't one. But what I would want to ask, if somebody said to me, hey, I think this is God's judgment on our culture for whatever, sins they want to articulate, a couple questions come to mind right away. Number one is, well, this is a global pandemic, right? It's hitting throughout the world in different degrees of severity. I would want to ask them, Germany is a way more secular country than we are, has just as much sin as we do, just as much pornography, more lack of marriage. I mean, it's way more progressively secular than we are, right?
Yeah.
And it is far, far less impacted by the coronavirus than the United States has been. So should we interpret that as God's blessing on Germany, which doesn't seem to make sense? Or we could pick a different country if you want. Another question I would have is, okay, let's go with your assumption that this virus is God's judgment on our country for whatever. Over the last 50, 60 years of the United States, we have grown exponentially in wealth, in comfort, in health, in longevity of life. In all kinds of metrics, we have progressed. So should we assume that was God's blessing? And just now we're getting a punishment? So could I go back to, 2004 and say, God really blesses us because look at how great things are going, and we don't have a global pandemic of a virus. There were lots of problems and sin in the United States in 2004. So it's so stupidly oversimplistic that it just makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, okay. I agree with you. But my inquisitive mind also wants to push back a little bit and say, well, interestingly enough, I think the Bible is kind of to blame for this in a weird way, in that in the Old Testament, it seems so clear that God says, you do this and obey me and follow me and I will bless you and you will have all these things.
And who is the you?
The Israelites.
Right. It's ancient Israel. It's not the United States. It's not the contemporary church. It's not the world. It's not Christian Taylor. And this is, John Walton says this all the time, the Bible was written for you. It was not written to you.
But can't we extrapolate from how God treats Israel, that if he treats Israel that way and thinks of Israel that way, and they're supposed to be the example of a person's relationship with God, can't we just assume that he's at least thinking about us that way in some way? I mean, God's character is still the same. yesterday, today, and tomorrow. His character, who he is, right? So he would get angry at the Israelites. He would be joyful toward the Israelites. We know he must be the same with us.
Yes, but here's the other added complication. Was that promise made to every individual Israelite? Did every single Israelite who sinned face God's wrath and judgment? Did everyone who didn't sin, was everyone who didn't sin blessed? And
no,
of course not. Like Daniel's a perfect example, right? He's a really unique character in the Bible because almost every other hero in the Old Testament has some significant failure, right? Moses was a murderer. Abraham was disobedient to God on numerous occasions. Noah got drunk and, had that whole issue.
And
David committed adultery. Right. David committed that. But Daniel's different. There's not a single story anywhere in the Bible of Daniel committing a sin. Right. And yet he offers one of the most compelling confessions of sin in chapter 9 of Daniel anywhere in the Bible. And it's not his sin that he's confessing. It's the sin of the people. Because he was in exile. He was taken from Jerusalem and exiled in Babylon for the sins of Israel that he himself never participated in. So that's the other dynamic, is these Old Testament promises were written, first of all, to a different nation, to a particular nation, and it was given to a people, not to individuals. So there were individual Israelites who were sinful and yet were rich and happy and fat. And we read about them in the Psalms and in Amos and in different prophets. And there were individual Israelites who were righteous and godly and upstanding who suffered terribly, like Job or Daniel, right, for things they didn't do. So it's a lot more complicated than we think. You can see this in the New Testament as well. You go to the book of Acts and you have that very vivid story of Ananias and Sapphira, right, who lie and God strikes them dead right there. Right? And you would think, well, here we go. It's kind of like the Old Testament. People disobey and God curses them and strikes them dead. In the book of Acts, you also have James being martyred. You have Stephen being martyred. They didn't sin.
You also have Peter lying. I don't know who this guy, no, I don't follow him.
Oh, yeah, that's in the Gospels, right? When Peter denies Jesus. But there are clear examples of righteous people dying,
experiencing bad things, and unrighteous people experiencing good things.
Right. Paul talks about this. Those who are preaching Jesus from bad motives when he's in prison in Philippi, and he says, "Hey, I don't know why they're doing it, but Christ is being proclaimed. Great, whatever." So, and Jesus made this a theme of his ministry over and over and over again, where, John chapter 9, they ask him, who sinned that this man was born blind? And Jesus said, nobody sinned. Or he later on in Luke talks about, this tower fell and killed a bunch of people. Do you think the people who died were less righteous than the people who lived? No. So this is a human instinct to say when something bad happens, it's God's punishment. And when something good happens, it's God's blessing. That's exactly the way the Pharisees saw the world. And it's exactly what Jesus debunks over and over and over again. And it's even debunked in the Old Testament. You can't apply this to every individual situation. That's what the book of Job is all about, a righteous man who suffers. And even when it comes to nations, the only nation that had a special covenant with God, to whom he revealed his plan to bless and curse the nation for their obedience or disobedience, is Israel. Now, if you have some knowledge of a special revelation of God to the United States, fine, that's different. But to apply those things to the United States now is just it's a gross misuse of Scripture, and to apply them to individual circumstances clearly violates Scripture because that's not there. Well, it just doesn't make any sense.
How are we supposed to think about this, Skye? I mean, it's hard for our minds to make sense, particularly during this huge global pandemic, how we think about it, because I believe that God can cause things to happen. He also allows things to happen. He is in control of the cosmos. That's what I believe, he says. So clearly he has control to either make this happen, stop this from happening. So
this is, I mean, we talked about this on the regular podcast. N.T. Wright wrote that wonderful piece for Time Magazine about lament is the proper response. And I think he talks about this in that article, but I think the proper response is to allow the Psalms to guide us. When you read the Psalms, those 150 poems in the middle of the Bible, that was kind of the prayer book of ancient Israel, you see the full spectrum of the human-divine relationship. You certainly see Psalms where they're praising God for all of his goodness and blessing, but there are a lot of Psalms, in fact, more Psalms.
Psalm 88, I read Psalm 88 today. That'll depress the heck out of you. I mean, I'm dying. Darkness is my friend.
There are way more negative Psalms than positive ones, and an awful lot of them are people saying, what are you doing, God? I don't understand what's happening. Why do the unjust thrive and the just fail? Why does it appear like you've broken your promises to us? Why am I in this? Why aren't you doing something? There's all these laments and cries for understanding, and there's not answers in most of those Psalms, but it's honest. And I mean, even Jesus at the cross is saying, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Right. But then by the end, he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So that's the thing we overlook in Scripture, is its brutal honesty about the human-divine relationship and the mystery of it all. So we want to just jump over all of that revelation and say, I have it figured out. This is what's going on, and here's why. And that retards spiritual growth. It retards our ability to really commune with God honestly in the struggle we feel, in the anxiety, in the ambiguities that we feel. If there's anything I would hang my hat on, it's that amid this coronavirus, we all have an opportunity to be more honest with God and grow more closely to him.
And that's a wonderful thing. The
degree to which we don't do that because we think we have it all figured out, we are abusing what grace may be available to us in this moment.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, again, a great question. I'm sure it's one that a lot of people have.
All right. Talk to you more soon.
See ya.
Bye.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Sean McDuffie, edited by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news.